So we're going to move on to discuss bureaucracies, which is a very, very important and a very, very common type of social group within modern societies. It is, in fact, one of the most common social groups within modern societies. Right now, we are studying, you are in class, in the middle of a bureaucracy, right? You are learning in a bureaucracy. You will work in a bureaucracy once you leave. You will interact in bureaucracies. They are an inescapable part of modern society, this particular type of social group. So it's a good idea that we learn what they are and what they're good for. So bureaucracies are nothing more than a very large secondary group. And it is a major characteristic of modern life. So we think about primary groups and secondary groups. Bureaucracies are just secondary groups, a very unique type of secondary group. We see examples of bureaucracies in the form of modern-day corporations and businesses. Modern-day governments are bureaucratic. Modern-day education is bureaucratic. And even modern-day religion is bureaucratic. So what makes a bureaucratic institution? What makes a bureaucratic organization? Other than it being a very large secondary group. Well, there's some common characteristics about bureaucracies. In fact, there's 6 characteristics of bureaucracies. First, bureaucracies are hierarchical. Bureaucracies are hierarchical. That means that there is a formal chain of command. So I saw some eyes light up whenever I said modern-day religions tend to be bureaucratic. Well, if you think about modern-day religions, they have a formal chain of command. Right? There are people at the top, there are people in the mid-level, there are people below them, and there are people at the bottom. So they are hierarchical. They include formal rules. So bureaucracies are those that include formal rules for participating in the organization, as well as formal rules for delivering a service or a product or what have you. So there are written rules that direct actions of people within a bureaucracy. So if you think about the modern day education system that you're in, there are rules for registration, there are rules for paying financial aid, there are rules for student conduct, there are rules for attendance, and there are rules in the classroom. And the vast majority of these, all of them I would say, are written. You can find them somewhere. In fact, as a freshman, all of you are given a handbook, a student handbook. Obey these, right? This will get you through, tell you who your advisor is, what to register, how to access services, how to get around the university. When I was hired at IUP, I was given a faculty handbook. And then later, I was given a sociology department handbook, which tells me where I get my paycheck, who I got to contact for different things, where I have to go, what I have to do, etc. Bureaucracies, in addition to having formal rules, are either what are called up-focused or in-focused. Up-focused or in-focused. So when we say up-focused, bureaucracies sometimes are created by an institution or another organization. And so the goals of that bureaucracy is to serve that organization or institution that creates it. So here at IUP, we are a public university. Who created us? The state, right? The Pennsylvania state government created IUP when they created the state system of higher education. And so our goals are typically focused on what the state wants us to do, right? What the state wants us to do. The state put together an organization that oversees us. They are the Board of Governors. And the Board of Governors tells us what the goals for IUP are. And we look up to that organization to tell us what to do and how to do it. Some organizations are in-focused. Right? Some organizations are in-focused. So in-focused organizations are typically created by that group. So businesses tend to be in-focused. Right? Businesses tend to be in-focused. They serve the needs of the organization. So when you guys graduate here, many of you will go off and work for places like PNC. You know, if you're going to be a business major, you might go work at like PNC or Mellon Bank or another bank. And banks tend to be in-focused. Their goals serve their investors, the people who support them, and serve the people of that organization to make sure that PNC stays a healthy bank, that Mellon stays a healthy bank, or if you go to work for Google or something like that, you're going to serve their investors and you're going to serve the company. Make sure that that company stays a healthy company. So bureaucracies are up-focused or in-focused. Bureaucracies are also specialized. People serve in specialized positions. So you all are training here at IUP to enter into a company and work in a specialized position at that company. And you are going to be employed based on your ability to fulfill skills. Right? Based on your ability to fulfill skills. So bureaucracies are skill-based. You learn a skill, and that's what you're hired for. You're not hired because you're cute, or you're handsome, or they like you. You're hired because you have a skill. And they are purposefully informal. Bureaucracies are created in such a way that we can fire one person and put another person in their place. It doesn't have to do with the personality of people. It has to do with what they can do. And so in bureaucracies, there is a purposefully informal interactional style. You try not to, at least as a whole, create a group that is a primary group where you know the intimate knowledge of people. You only need to know that they can fulfill the job that they've been employed to do. Well, bureaucracies are a very common feature of modern life. They're going to be something that you exist in and will continue to exist in throughout your daily lives. But importantly, bureaucracies are somewhat new. They are really a function of the changes that occurred at the start of the Industrial Revolution. So it's a relatively new type of social group, but it has turned out to be one of the most common types of social group that exist in modern societies today. Bureaucracies are these rational organizations. This is what Max Weber calls them. He says, bureaucracies are rational groups or rational organizations. And it's because they are built to complete tasks or accomplish goals in the most efficient, effective, and fair way possible. So if you compare bureaucracies to other types of secondary groups, bureaucracies have this advantage of focusing on efficiency, effectiveness, and fairness in providing a service or providing a good for society. Weber says that the most important characteristic is really this principle of efficiency. And if you think about it, schools and businesses and even governments are kind of based on accomplishing very, very large goals, and they do it very, very efficiently, very, very fast, very, very effectively. Now, being that we are all part of a modern society, it's sometimes hard to think of an organization that isn't bureaucratic. Right? Doesn't follow these 6 principles. So I'm going to give you some examples of organizations that are kind of opposite of bureaucracies, and what we typically come to think of them as being are corrupt organizations. We typically talk about non-bureaucratic organizations as corrupt organizations. So what are different forms of corruption? First would be nepotism. Does anybody know what nepotism means? What is nepotism? Go ahead.
Getting jobs based on who your family is or who your friends are.
Yes.
Not being getting a job when you're not qualified.
Yes. Nepotism is favoring your family members. Right? Nepotism is favoring your family members. So we can think about governments and businesses and schools and even religions organized in such a way that it favors members of families who belong to that organization. So if we want to think about government corruption where nepotism is important, in order to get that government service or that government good, you need to be related to someone who works in government. To think about this in terms of the economy, to either work for or get a service from a business, you need to know or you need to be a family member of someone who works for that business. So the way that most of our businesses work today, and most of our modern governments work, is that you don't have to be a family member to an official in government in order to get something done or to get a service. You don't have to be a family member of someone who works in that business to get a product from that business or a service. So bureaucracies improve efficiency by getting rid of this notion of nepotism. Aside from nepotism is cronyism. So if nepotism is favoring your family, what is cronyism? It's a good way to think about it. Go ahead.
Is that maybe favoring your friends?
Yeah, your friends. Right, so instead of having a family member in a business or a school or a government agency to favor you, it would be a friend favoring your friends. So bureaucracies kind of get rid of this principle of nepotism as well as this principle of cronyism. And then there's other forms of favoritism as well. Just general favoritism if you belong to something that may give you access to that organization. Bureaucracies tend to eliminate nepotism, cronyism, and favoritism. Or at the very least, if not eliminate, severely reduce nepotism, cronyism, and favoritism. If we think about the way governments worked prior to bureaucratization of governments, we can look at the monarchies of Europe. Right? The monarchies of Europe were not bureaucratized as they would be in modern day. So who was favored in the monarchies of Europe? It was the family members of the monarch, and the friends of the monarch, and the allies of the monarch. So government ran on these principles of nepotism, cronyism, and favoritism. If you wanted a government service or a good prior to modern day, you needed to buddy up with that official, become their friend, or be a family member of that official, or in some way, shape, or form gain the favor of that official for him, or in new cases, her, to do something for you. Right? In addition to this, organizations that are non-bureaucratic may work on the form of bribery. Payment for service, payment for attention. So bribery is paying to gain favor. Bureaucratic organizations severely reduce the use of bribery. Right? The use of bribery. And And then capriciousness. Capriciousness is decision-making based on whims or based on external factors. So you can think about governments or businesses making decisions about whether or not you get a product or service based on a whim, whether they decide to give it to you that day or not decide to give it to you that day. You can imagine a place like McDonald's. You pull up to the drive-through window and you order your burger and fries, and somebody says, no. What are you going to do? Scratch your head and be like, what? Why? And they say, I don't feel like making it for you today. I don't feel like making that burger. So you don't get one. Right? This is capriciousness. You could think about in education, capriciousness as being your professors walking into class and saying, I don't like how you're dressed today. You get an F. You didn't do your hair today. You get an F. I don't like your shirt. You get an F. What is that professor doing? They're making decisions not based on your skill, not based on the things that they're supposed to be making those decisions on, but kind of non-related things. Bureaucracies, because they are formal and based on rules, they heavily reduce the form of corruption known as capriciousness. And then finally, abuse of power as well. So you can imagine being in a business or being in an organization where someone says, if you don't give me $5 each day out of your paycheck, I'm going to fire you. And I'll find somebody else to give me that kickback, right? That $5 each day out of your paycheck. You're earning $35 a day or you're earning $100 a day. I'm only asking for $5. Well, that's an abuse of power. It's your boss asking you for money that doesn't belong to your boss. Because bureaucracies have formal rules and formal interactions, that heavily reduces the use of abuse of power. And the total kind of combination of these reductions of corruption make bureaucracies really, really efficient. It makes people focus on the goal and accomplishing the goal of that bureaucracy. So bureaucracies are good in that they reduce these types of corruption, as well as make very, very efficient organizations. Modern society would not be possible without the modern bureaucracy. We just wouldn't be able to accomplish what we can accomplish in our organizations without these bureaucratic principles. However, bureaucracies, from the functionalist perspective, have their own dysfunctions as well as functions. So, in terms of dysfunctions, one of the major dysfunctions is alienation. Because people are treated informally within a bureaucracy, and when interacting within a bureaucracy, sometimes people and services become numbers rather than people. So there's been a lot of complaints for the education system. Right? Our modern bureaucratized institution of education looks at students as numbers rather than as individual people. Right? You all have a student ID, I have a faculty ID, and basically everything that you need from your freshman year to graduation, everything that I need from the time that I start working here until retirement will be processed through that ID number. Will be processed through that ID number. I can move through that bureaucracy. I can go through my entire career as a professor. You can go through your entire career as a student, and nobody knows your name. Nobody knows who you are. Nobody knows what you're like as a person. And that can make that organization feel pretty cold. Right? Think about the interactions that you have at the financial aid office. You walk up to that gate, they automatically ask for your student ID number, and they tell you what's going on with you. And you may hear something negative, you may hear you're not getting financial aid, or you're having a problem with your financial aid, and you say, look, I have to make a payment on my car, I have to pay the rent, and I have to buy food. How am I going to be able to do that without my financial aid refund? And what does the person say at the tiller? Tough luck, I'm sorry. Right? So bureaucracies can be kind of alienating. They can treat people as numbers rather than as human beings with emotions and needs and desires. Bureaucracies also suffer from what's known as goal displacement. Goal displacement. Which is that bureaucracies will replace one goal for another rather than disbanding. So bureaucracies are really, really good at accomplishing goals. They're not really good at getting rid of themselves after the goal has been completed. So sometimes bureaucracies are created to service some very important societal goal, and then that goal goes away for one reason or another. And what you find is that bureaucracies don't go away as easily. So here's a great example of this. We had an amendment to our Constitution for about 12 years that banned alcohol and alcohol consumption in the United States. It was known as prohibition. And as a result of this banning of alcohol throughout the United States, a bureaucracy was created to make sure that people were not producing alcohol, were not selling alcohol, and were not consuming alcohol. They were known as the Bureau of Prohibition. The Bureau of Prohibition. They were part of the Treasury Department. And there was lots of, thousands of agents that were hired. There were buildings that were constructed. There was cars that were purchased, guns that were purchased, badges that were purchased, uniforms that were purchased, trainings that were held, all to make sure that alcohol wasn't consumed, wasn't produced, and wasn't sold in the United States. Well, what happens? After about 12 years, prohibition is overturned. That societal goal no longer was useful. What happened to that agency? Did everybody just go, well, law has changed, we're done, let's pack it in and go home? What do you think actually happened? In fact, they started to focus on a small plant that was being smoked by a very small variety of people in the South and southwestern United States, known as marijuana. And eventually moved from being called the Bureau of Prohibition to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and also the Drug Enforcement Agency. So what did they do? They changed their goal from fighting alcohol to fighting illicit drugs, illicit alcohol, illicit tobacco, illicit firearms. This is what we mean by suffering from goal displacement. Bureaucracies also suffer from a problem known as bureaucratic inertia. Bureaucracies sometimes grow beyond their usefulness. Remember that they're designed to be efficient, effective, and fair. They're what get us what we need as fast as they possibly can. Well, bureaucracies tend to continually grow. When you're upward focused, you grow based on people seeing that you're doing a good job and allowing you to grow. When you're inward focused as a bureaucracy, you grow based on your success. So much money in the business is reinvested into new business. So much money of that business is reinvested into employing more people and growing that business. Well, sometimes that business or that organization can grow so large that it actually becomes less useful rather than more useful. In fact, one of the things that happens in bureaucracies is they begin to grow what's known as above the line. They grow a lot above the line. So a good example of this is companies that grow and continue to hire managers and then managers for those managers then managers for those managers, then managers for those managers. Bureaucracies aren't just inefficient because they tend to grow management, right? They're also inefficient because they tend to set up processes that slow things down. And this is known as red tape, right? Red tape. Bureaucracies function based on rules and regulations, and those rules and regulations sometimes unnecessarily slow down the distribution of goods and services. So, great example, since I picked on PNC, I should pick on IUP. How do you get a minor at IUP? Does anybody know? How do you choose a minor at IUP? Go ahead. Go to the office, fill out a form, right? What do we see happen at IUP in terms of minors? People go to the office, fill out a form, and then bring that form back to their major advisor, right? Then the major advisor has to push the minor student all the way back to the other place to submit it. Then that form gets kicked up to the dean's office. Then the dean's office has to inform the other dean's office that the minor has been submitted. So before it's all said and done, to get a minor, that piece of paper has to go through at least 10 different sets of hands, right? 10 different sets of hands. And that's why, from the time that you decide, hey, I want to be a minor, till it turns up on your record, maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks, even a month. So red tape is when rules and regulations unnecessarily slow down the distribution of goods or services. Okay?